Hello and welcome to a sort of rambly review of sorts. It's unscripted and it's just kind of my thoughts on this film that I just watched literally like less than an hour ago. So, The Irishman, film directed by Martin Scorsese, has a pretty excellent cast of actors: Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Joe Pesci. Uh, this film is critically acclaimed. I don't really see how, and you'll find out my thoughts on it in a little bit, but what I tend to understand through this film is that it's just inferior to The Wolf of Wall Street in every way, and it kind of does the same thing in a lot of its structure, I should say, and I'll talk about that. So let's just begin with the first act. The first act is actually a pretty cool dive into like the gangster operation of these people that are within the film. Uh, Frank and Russell are the main, characters of this story to operate off of. There's one more character later, but we'll get to him. But in the first act, it's just Frank and Russell, and you get to see them pulling each other's legs for different favors and different types of things that are happening. And this is a pretty cool way to set up, like contextual like evidence or like a conceit for this movie to operate off of, and I thought it was done, pretty nicely. I mean, Martin Scorsese has been pretty good at, building a foundation for these films in general. I don't really know how to talk about the structure of his films a lot because I just kind of watch them and like soak in everything he's trying to say through them. I don't care to comment on sort of the aesthetic or cinematography he tries to build, even though I feel like it's really similar to how The Wolf of Wall Street really is in like these. Actually, I don't even. I said I'm not going to comment on the cinematography. I think it's pretty much similar in cinematography to The Wolf of Wall Street in a lot of ways, especially in the camera movement and dynamic of that camera. Uh, but let's talk about you know these characters because they are like a mob, and it's like the Italian mob. Uh, so these characters are characterized as sort of nicely intimidating and also inviting at the same time. You got these people that are really critical members of the society they operate in, and they control every step of the operation in a way that is, completely unbeknownst to anyone's control, and they have a, just a tight grip on everything around them, and people fear them because of it. And you can see it through, uh, Frank learning the operation through Russell, and it's pretty cool to see in this first act. And not a lot happens in this first part of the movie. It's like I guess around the 1 hour mark, we get to finally see some stuff outside of it, and I think that's where this film starts to struggle. But until that point, I was enjoying it mildly. The second act is underwhelming as we follow this new character, Jimmy Hoffa, which is a labor union leader. And Frank is basically Jimmy Hoffa's bodyguard for the second part of this film. And we take a detour off of, most of the major ideas or interesting people that we initially latched onto, which I'm fine with, as long as Jimmy Hoffa is interesting. But he turns out not to be in this sort of middle section of the movie. Jimmy Hoffa is the most charismatic and passionate player in this movie, but he falls flat on his face because his importance is pretty much placated on how he impacts our main guy, Frank, because Frank is the only guy we really care about, pretty much, up until this point. Frank is a guy that, from the very beginning, has built to be sort of a, rugged war veteran who, is an obedient soldier at heart, and he just can't seem to shake that mentality off his mind. So when he initially gets into the mob and takes orders, he just rolls with it and he just goes with the flow, and that's kind of his thing. And through this new character, Jimmy Hoffa, it's sort of to build interest in the idea that he might have to come to his own decisions because he's, guarding such an important figure, and he can't really be distracted by anything around him in order to complete that one goal. But no, he still remains the same person throughout this entire film, and I think that's kind of a theme throughout the film. But I don't find it interesting that he stays the same. I think that if you had, at least come to an understanding within himself, I think that would have been cool. But he doesn't really veer off the beaten path a lot, and I think that my problem that exists in, I guess, all the acts is that the narration that he does feels disconnected to the actual events and scenes happening on your screen. So in this movie, there's something similar in The Wolf of Wall Street. Jordan Belfort or Leonardo DiCaprio gives insight and context sometimes. He's like, yeah, this is how Wall Street operated, and this was called, I don't know, just staging the market or something like that. He does these little intersections to explain what's happening on screen, and it blends really nicely. It's fluid, it all makes sense, and he's really charismatic, and that's why it works. Meanwhile, Robert De Niro, he also does this, but he's talking from a present self. He is talking through the advent of like just being a monologue bot, and I don't find that interesting at all, and I don't think it adds to the interest behind his character or the interest behind the plot of America at this time period. Um, sure, Frank is giving monologue to explain gravity of situations, but it doesn't feel necessary to my understanding, and it disconnects me more than, giving me some valuable insight into, what is the world like. He does say like what um events are occurring and like how those events are impacting, but it doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel like his sentence or his sentiments of this time period are interesting or hold gravity because he's such a uncharismatic guy, and also he's not that interesting first of all. uh but anyway, like, again with the Wolf of Wall Street, he's giving you the rundown and talking about legality and how it relates to like what they're actually doing in a way that sort of strikes a balance between not especially expository or just a lecture to you, where when Robert De Niro is narrating these scenes, it seems like it's a lecture and he's sort of just giving you information just so you can have that information. When I don't think that's great. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like when or when Leonardo DiCaprio is talking about lewds in The Wolf of Wall Street, it's staged in a way that you literally can feel the impact of those lewds taking their toll on um what's his name? Jimmy, I guess his name was in the film, the guy Jonah Rauch, or not Jonah, what was his name? Jonah Hill plays him, and they're talking about lewds, and then it's directly correlated to his facial expression and everything he is saying. Whereas when Robert De Niro is talking about like Kennedy and like the assassination and stuff like that, it doesn't really add up in a way because like although they're showing like clips of or Kennedy being assassinated and stuff like that, and like clips of the impact or sort of like the general public perception of this assassination, it doesn't feel like it holds a foothold in either the characters' lives or the narrative because like it feels flat to me. Um, Also like the tone of his voice, like the drowsy and slow retelling and examination of these events of that time period just makes me feel like just don't have these monologues at all and just have these silent tribulations into like more so what the characters are thinking. Like I would much rather hear what Frank or Robert De Niro's character is thinking at this time and how the impact of that event is going to impact his decisions from that point forward, rather than just telling me this is Joe Butthead and he, you know, was skinny butthead too, and like it doesn't even make any sense to me. So anyway, one consistently annoying thing is is how Frank decides to explain something beforehand instead of it letting it play out with suspense. And that lack of suspense in the film, it just haunts a lot of these really cool scenes where Frank is just monologuing while he's just ruthlessly executing people, and it doesn't really feel impactful. It doesn't really help you understand like what exactly is going through his mind, why he's doing these things. If it's only blindly for the mob, then yeah, I can get that. But like the point of contention I'm just trying to understand is why we put so much focus on his sort of emotional state in some ways, especially because we take time to understand like what does he react strongly to, what kind of moral code does he even have, because when someone pushes his daughter at the grocery mart, he just literally just eviscerates the guy who pushed her, and we see what kind of person he is. He's a person to take things in very personally, um, but when he is trying to, I think you get what I mean. Like Frank is about to kill somebody, and there's some nice slow building music, this and this somber tone, and even when he executes somebody, it's the same thing over and over again. The music doesn't stop, and it's the same slow dance type of feeling where when I see someone die, I don't really want it to feel or be meaningless. Maybe the impact of death in this film just doesn't hit me right, or it just like doesn't feel the right way, but I can't really see Frank being this half thug, half blundering soldier with a subservient morality, just executing guy after guy and feeling content watching the film like this. It doesn't really hold anything in my head when I think about it like that. Um, let's go over something a bit more broad. The story isn't all that interesting because you follow all these characters because they're ground level cool. They're not interesting, they're cool because they are mob. They are gangsters. And if you like gangster movies or you like just seeing like, things like Scarface or something like that, you think these types of characters are cool. And the story overall isn't that cool despite having these cool characters in it. This might tie into how personally I'm not interested in this period of American history that much, time during Kennedy's election, not really that big of a moment for me in American history. And let's take that into consideration because it does play into part. Like, although this is completely my, I mean, all of these videos are my personal opinion. This is a historically based character drama, so in that stead, what exactly about this time period or a specific area of our history makes it interesting for me to watch? Well, for starters, like you have this rampant mess of a guy just doing favor after favor because we gotta. And that's kind of the whole essence of this time period, just people doing favors for each other in this mob group over and over because that's the norm. And the film itself acknowledges this idea. Everyone does something because someone told them to. And I think Frank goes over this in one of his monologues, just like, as a soldier, I have already been taught what it means to be obedient. But even without that, in this mob group, you would still be doing this regardless because everyone, it all ties back to Russell. Everything goes back to Russell, and if you betray him, you already know what's going to happen. So you just do what you're told to. I don't find that sort of I just don't find that era interesting in that way because like there's no bombastic outlier in this movie. There's no rotten sinister attitude I hold towards these gangsters. Like although they commit crimes and do egregious acts, like they're not painted to be just like grievous criminals. There's no character in this film that really goes off the beaten path and takes a more outrageous approach to um you know, the world around him. They're all just really subservient, and they all just look up to the big guy on the block. Now, it isn't what you really want to do per se. Like, let me explain. When you have a Tarantino character drama like Django Unchained, yeah, I think it's a character drama at essence. I think there would have been a lot more entertainment value if there was just more spunk and power behind characters, because most of these characters are just lifeless in their attitude, and they don't feel compelling in that way because you can't tell what drives them. You can't tell what wakes them up in the morning. You just don't know what to think of them. They're just there and they act on their own. They're just their own set pieces, and you don't feel connected with them as an audience member because like this is a mob group after World War II, and like how am I supposed to connect? I'm Gen Z. Like there's no way I can possibly connect to these guys' moral code at all. So that's already a hurdle. Also, there's no relatability in terms of you know, the way these characters are portrayed to be just, lifeless as I said. Um not they're not necessarily okay, what I think is that Tarantino's characters are just not necessarily unrealistic in Django Unchained. They're just entertaining to watch, and even if they are unrealistic to some extent, it doesn't matter because entertainment value makes up for that fault. And, I'm watching this movie to either be informed or be entertained on something the director has to say and as a bigger image, right? Frank, Jimmy, and Russell, all these characters in the film, sure they have screen presence, but I didn't find them entertaining. Like out of all the characters in this film, I like Jimmy the most because he's actually the one point of like I guess he's like a minor outlier in this sea of conformity. But conformity isn't even made to be a big point in this film in the first place. Um, you know, as I said, I can't really understand their motives and what drives them. They just aren't gripping or forcefully essential to your understanding to the film as a whole. That's where I have a problem. But let me explain why I like Jimmy Hoffa. Remember when I said like 10 minutes ago when Jimmy Hoffa wasn't all that special and was just kind of a device for Frank to operate off of? Well, around 2 hours into this film, he actually has some growing interest as he develops as a character. He becomes this kind of loose cannon guy out for vengeance, and that's pretty cool. The plot actually feels relevant again, and it's all because of him. Up until that point, I didn't feel compelled to, really delve into what exactly is going on in the world or what is going on with these characters in relation to the world until Jimmy Hoffa turns this leaf in the film and becomes this um, sort of barbarian to the Italian mob. He's, still that passionate guy, but he becomes misguided and will stop at nothing to do what he deems the right thing in his head, which is, take over his union again because it's his union. Um, Misguided in not especially his code of morals or anything like that, which seems to be a point of, interest for Frank, but not him. He's misguided in his negligence of a harsh truth about society, or not society, but his own safety and his life in general. Um, it actually provides a large and consistent fear for what happens to him, especially if I mean, even I found myself not caring for him in the beginning of the film, but when he does have this stronger introduction, I mean, this is like the second coming of Christ here. This is like a second introduction where he actually does receive development, and I actually got to a point where you do care for what happens to him and whether he will be able to succeed in his ultimate goal. You know, uh, let's talk about Frank for a second because although I like Jimmy, like Frank is the main character, and and since this is a character drama, might as well go over the character in question. Let's just go over Robert De Niro in general for a second. Something interesting I noticed about Robert De Niro's characters over time, right? he always plays these types of characters that are stuttery and make excuses. Take a stroll back to Jackie Brown for a second. In Jackie Brown, he plays this same type of character where he's a cold hard killer but always sputters and makes excuses when the chips are down. In this film, his unbelievable loyalty and obedience are his natural state. And he makes excuses, but not specifically through a lot of dialogue. He does do some, dialogue-based excuses to, sort of explain his actions, but most of them are in his facial expressions, and I think that was the point. He has a bunch of scenes where he has facial resistance and gets characterizational resistance to events happening, like Jimmy's assassination, are especially high points for my recognition of this little quirk of his sort of characters over time. Um, I think this is the first movie of this caliber, I think, where I've seen it done in this way for Robert De Niro in general. And even if like the excuses are against his moral code or something like that, he'll keep quiet and just let it show on his face, which is pretty cool, I guess. But Frank, in general, is just this really, I guess, dumb character. If I'm being honest, like he doesn't really serve to prove anything about uh you know where he comes from, what his walk of life proves about him and his relationship to the mob. He doesn't really prove anything to his family, especially because the family dynamic I'll touch on later becomes apparent. Uh, he doesn't really have anything that I found driving him, especially because it doesn't relate to anything happening on screen. That he does something and then it doesn't mean anything, and that's a problem. And I just can't say much more about him. He's just a quiet guy. He just gets the job done and he does what he's told to, and I just can't relate to that type of character. I can't see myself understanding that on a deeper level of why is he driven by such a by such menial labor and treated like an inferior, and then just deals with it because he's a soldier. He's a foot soldier at heart and he knows his place. I just don't understand that. Um I have some little thoughts on the music choices in this film. The placement of the music is pretty sparse and it's actually to its benefit, I think. Um the music was especially well realized for scenes that mattered. I don't really want to touch that heavily on music. I just think that all in all, the music choices were really nice and set the mood correctly for a lot of scenes, and it wasn't oppressive, which is a major benefit. I hate when music is just constantly used to oppress your eardrums and it doesn't really provide anything to you except just play these symphonic melodies. No, there's actually a lot of quiet and really reflective scenes where it's just letting the sounds of the world take foothold over, some soundtrack, right? And I'm glad that happened because I really don't like it when I'm just being blasted constantly with symphonic, just orchestral music. And don't get me wrong, I like hearing orchestral music when it matters. But yeah, it was good here. So let's talk about this family subplot that I mentioned before I got into music. So this sort of subplot I found lackluster is in this film there's this repeating idea that Frank's daughter is like the moral compass that sort of represents how far strung he is into this mob life. And when Jimmy Hoffa is killed by him, she loses all contact with him, symbolizing his complete betrayal and disappearance of any semblance of humanity or morality anymore. This daughter of his is named Peggy, but that doesn't really matter. Um, I don't really like this. Through the advent of something a lot more influential like Russell, maybe? Yeah, I could see this being more plausible, but his daughter doesn't really play a significant part in this film. And even if she is attempted to be made something of a significant figure, it ends up being a red herring of sorts. Near the end of this film, this new theme pops up where he goes to the church and constantly wants the priest to help him reach God and forgive all of his sins and that type of stuff. But through this, he is asked by the priest, if he has any remorse for, the families he's destroyed or regrets of his actions killing all those people. I mean, he won't obviously admit to it because it would betray, uh, you know, the people he was involved with, even though they're all dead. And that's brought up as a point as well. Like, who are you protecting anymore? There's nobody. There's nobody to protect anymore. Frank still denies he has any remorse for this, and his moral compass is gone. But through the advent of his kid, it doesn't really make any sense to me. I don't know how to compartmentalize this and like put it into words for you. So after this idea is presented, he goes to see his kid and connect with his daughter, which is pretty much him connecting with humanity in a way, and she still rejects him because she's still salty about him killing Jimmy Hoffa. And that is kind of the breaking point for her, especially because like she played a major part in his life. Father, she never has, sort of type of thing. Um, and you see, I have no clue why even is a thing. Like over and over through this film, like all throughout the very beginning to the very end, this girl is made to be like some sort of symbol to him. Some sort of like he just constantly looks at her for some reason to reassure himself that he's grounded in reality when he's really not. And I wish she provided more, at least dialogue. She didn't even say anything. She didn't even say anything to him except for like why at the end. She says, why'd you do it? Or why won't you contact Joe? Because you know you did it, jerk. Um, yeah, she just doesn't even say anything, so it can't really draw anything from, it's just like an awkward silence. It's something you just can't draw anything from. You could, obviously paint her as a symbol, as I have done, and I have sort of dug into quite a bit, but I just don't find it engaging or interesting. Um, yeah, I just have no clue why this is a thing. Uh, she's only relevant at the very end. That's kind of the only thing. She's only relevant at the very end, and she plays a part where it matters the absolute least. Like literally the last 10 minutes of the film, it matters nada, and I just don't get it. But yeah, those are my thoughts on The Irishman. I think the movie is a light 5 to a strong 4. That's what I'm feeling. The Wolf of Wall Street is a much better film in every way. I think that's a pretty understandable argument if you've even seen this movie, which is 3.5 hours long. This movie is long, and it doesn't have to be that long. Just cut out every single moment we're in the present and just don't have that be a thing. It just doesn't even make sense why we gotta have this internal monologue. Ah. Yeah, that's about it.